Thank you for letting me to speak, and I'd like to echo everything you said about Lough Neagh. I think I've done it myself, and I don't think anything you said is an exaggeration of the issues. It's a really serious issue. There needs to be a collaborative approach here to get a solution to it. So we were brought in to look at the legal issues, and I was going to just open with a wide-ranging overview, really, which is what we have done at the outset, and to set the picture or the scene for the issue. So there's a wide range of bodies and organisations responsible for the pollution. So I think you'd referenced that. And some of the published statistics, 15% of farmers are subject to sanctions. There's been reports that 62% of phosphorus pollution in Lough Neagh came from agriculture, 24% caused by wastewater, and 12% from septic tanks. So that's publicly available information, and those are the main sources of the pollution. So we also know that there's a wide range of bodies and organisations that hold some level of responsibility for issues concerning Lough Neagh. So you have the department, DERA, obviously. You have the regulator, which sits within the department. You have the co-op. You have various other organisations, and it's quite a confusing picture, really, at the start. So that we couldn't identify any clear picture or any clear line of responsibility. I think that's part of the problem here as well. We also identified a vast range of persons, bodies, organisations. We considered stakeholders in this, so it referenced farmers as being responsible for some of the pollutants, sewage, phosphorus, etc. We identified clear conflicts arising between some of those organisations. So environment sits as part of the department, but so does agriculture, and there's policies being passed in relation to agriculture which damage the environment. So one of those policies was growing for growth, so that was quite an aggressive growth strategy for agriculture, but the statistics show that that's resulted in quite a lot of pollution for Lough Neagh and wider afield. There's no independent regulator, so the environmental agency sits within DERA, and as such can't be considered as independent. As well as that, its powers have been significantly curbed by decision makers within the department, so fines have been capped at 15% of their potential for those that was guilty of polluting the land. So there's been wide-ranging commentary, a variety of people, experts, media, general public campaign groups. We identified that many of those opinions are informed by the interests of that person or that group. So not only do we have a wide range of opinions on the issues, but also a wide range of stakeholders with various competing interests and then various opinions as to what the solution should be. The issue of private ownership is something that has been widely publicised, and I'm sure we'll come to that in due course. The operation and management of Lough Neagh, there's a clear between and a clear gap there in that governance. And then there's been historic failures then to address these issues. These are long-standing issues, and that's clear from public record. Since 2015, the ecological status of Lough Neagh has been rated as bad, and that's continued in 2020 and 2021. NI Water stated they do not currently have the ability to track discharges from all overflows, and during periods of heavy rainfall, heavily diluted water may be discharged from storm overflows, and there are the same issues with the water system, and there's capacity issues with the sewage infrastructure in and around Lough Neagh. So when we first came in, that was the view really that we had developed. There are some specific legal actions that are in there for consider, and I'm happy to come back to them in each course. But that's the overview really that we have doing.
Thank you very much. I'm really privileged and delighted to come and speak to you all here this evening. I'm a passionate sea swimmer, so I do know the benefits of cold water swimming and its impact on anyone with problems with mental health and just physical well-being. So I understand the sense of injustice that people who cannot do that at the minute and who have had that safe space put at risk certainly feel aggrieved, and why that's so important. I suppose my background is I'm a director at Phoenix Law. It's a firm in Belfast which has a focus on human rights and various. We do public law. All of our lawyers do judicial review challenges in an attempt to hold the government to account in situations like this. I came to do that type of work from a background on acting for victims of historical abuse, survivors of church and state abuse, and through that went into challenging the government in terms of their failures to provide redress and to look after those that they've harmed. So, and through that work, have become involved in public law challenges in different areas, including the environment. And more recently, I was instructed in relation to the Southern Regional College working in cahoots with Armagh, Banbridge, Craigavon Council to plonk a regional college in the middle of a public park. Again, a community safe space, so important after COVID, when everybody's mental health is up the left, and for the government to fail repeatedly and take those safe spaces away, I agree is outrageous and shouldn't happen. So I am really delighted to some way help and prepare to ensure that this stops, and that the law can commence some kind of repair and healing and get back to allowing people to have sport and enjoyment of it. As I said, however, I am on maternity leave and I am rusty, so I'm grateful for your forbearance this evening, and I'm happy to answer questions and things at the end. But my thoughts initially are that there's kind of what professional lawyers and academics can be looking at are a range of actions that we can take now, or that we can work together and collaborate. And I suppose my initial thoughts that kind of occurred to me are, what are your mechanisms for making the government do, making the government stop, making Northern Ireland Water do and stop, and to effect truth recovery, and to effect answers. And I think everybody's outraged that there's clearly evidence that there was an awareness of what was going on for so many years, and yet this has been allowed to continue, and other things have been prioritised as usual in Northern Ireland. So three broad areas. First of all, make it stop, and the law can do that. And I suppose I'm very lucky, and similarly with Conal, to get instructed to use the law in a way that can actually cause and affect positive change. And like here, there are avenues that you can take, namely by way of injunction to ask the government to make this stop and set out the fact that what they've been doing is against the law, it's against European law, it's against common sense, it's against your morals, it's just ridiculous. So here's what you need to do and make it stop, and working together with experts and academics. In my experience in campaign cases like this has just always been so much more successful. So you've taken the step to collaborate, and it's a fantastic first step. In order then to ask government to make something stop, we often use a mechanism called judicial review. The government challenge, and I know that Home Rule's office and my office have some early stage judicial reviews out there to ask DERA and Northern Ireland Water to take responsibility to disclose what they knew and when, and obviously inform all the other agencies who are involved and make that public. You have a right to know. I guess the Lough Neagh is one of the few bodies of water. It actually affects every county in Northern Ireland, so it's such a huge issue, and it's a matter of huge public importance. So this is the kind of judicial review that would be prioritised and heard very quickly. You would imagine by the court would prioritise this, and there's a huge public outrage and campaign with various groups. That I'm aware of. The third stage that I know Home Rule and I had talked about was truth recovery. And yes, people should be compensated for harms caused to them, and the government should take steps to stop pollution and obviously the public health outworkings of that. But also the public are entitled to know, well, why was this allowed to happen? And why have you prioritised various other things over public health, which should be paramount? And there are different mechanisms for truth recovery, and that's something that will have to be considered that you may want to talk about more broadly. But obviously, I'm involved in public inquiry at the minute. I worked with the group that brought about the inquiry into Muckmore Abbey Hospital scandal, and they felt that whilst there's independent panels that can prepare reports, and that can be very, I guess there's positives and negatives to the statutory inquiry mechanism and independent panels, and both are excellent at trying to establish what went wrong and provide recommendations for the future. But why the Muckmore families felt that the statutory inquiry was the way forward was that quite often you have various ministers in post over a long period of time, and there's a blame game, and a kind of you can find like getting jelly attached to a wall easier than identifying who dropped the ball or who purposely allowed it to happen. So with the statutory inquiry, you have benefits such as powers to compel witnesses and powers to compel documents, and like the RHI scandal, like so many different areas where our government have let us down, those powers have been very important, because you will find that they don't often just disclose how these things occurred on a voluntary basis. So that could be something that would be worth chasing up with the department. And again, Northern Ireland is such an interesting place to be a human rights lawyer. Of course, we seem to kind of peak and trough through periods of devolution and more often not. So again, there's an issue there about whenever we were trying to affect the Muckmore investigation. Okay, well, the minister under the Inquiries Act has the power to call an inquiry. We've got no minister in post. Okay, what will we do now? So, and again, similarly, I suppose we're we now have some clarity on who we need to write to and force to call that type of investigation if that's what those affected feel is what they want. I know that the other thing, there's many people have been physically harmed and they would be entitled to compensation for those health problems that they've suffered and mental health problems, and that's another avenue. I suppose that's kind of my initial thoughts, and I'm very happy to answer any questions as well. But I'm just very grateful to be asked to come along, and if I can be of any assistance to this very capable group of people, I would be delighted to be. So thank you.
For clarification, has any of the fishermen or you men took an interest in the group action for us?
No, that's for you.
Yeah, I can maybe answer that. Yeah, I've spoken to quite a number of the fishermen and the men, and so that there's individual legal actions that some are pursuing, but the overarching issue that Claire's talking about is a public inquiry. So the best way to do that would be to pull all of the groups together onto an executive committee, and there has been an expression of interest really in doing that around a common goal. It hasn't crystallised yet, but people have expressed an interest in doing that. But that's definitely the best route. You know, if people agree that a public inquiry is the proper mechanism.
It's about, I've long experienced public inquiries from the West Link to BMAP, and they're generally a good way to burst yourself in presentations, and then after the inspector goes away and comes to a predetermined conclusion, normally on behalf of the government. It's just my sceptical interpretation of public inquiries.
Yeah, no, Claire's been involved in public inquiries, and so have I. I'm currently involved in the COVID inquiry, and the families there feel that there's a high quality of hearing there, and they're really getting to the heart of government's decision making. And Claire referenced a couple of very important points about the statutory powers that the chair possesses to compel witnesses, to compel the production of documents, and that was proven to be very effective in the COVID inquiry, but I accept that.
I mean, it's like a soap opera, that public inquiry. It is amazing.
And you're right, and it's because of those powers that I mean, Conan's involved in the COVID inquiry. I'm not, but like you say, how else would you have got access to those WhatsApp messages that are proven to be so controversial and kind of mind blowing that people in positions of trust and scrutiny would send such messages? But it's only through those powers that you'll get it. But I do recognise that the public perception of a statutory inquiry can be, it's far too long, it's far too expensive, you know, we get lost for years, and ultimately we come up with probably, you know, findings that, well, you know, don't abuse people in hospital. Well, we know that, but it's through those powers that you really can drill into how this has happened and make it stop. And even I am involved with another group of people, the survivors of the mother and baby homes, and a lot of work we've done with the families and affected people, and various independent reports from this university actually, including and even those researchers working with the people affected found that the only mechanism that was going to have the bar to get to the heart of why and how that was allowed to happen and everyone affected was allowed to be harmed in that way was the statutory investigation.
Yeah, I deliberately sort of set the scene in such a way as to sort of demonstrate the wide range of people, the wide range of issues, the wide range of opinion, and you know, individual legal actions can be brought, but it won't cure the overall issue. You know, we'll win the battle and win the war. So I would endorse what Claire has said there. I think the public inquiry is a mechanism that should be considered, really, put all of these issues under one umbrella and to put them in the whole with all stakeholders making a contribution to that. And there are some issues that are not capable of legal challenge, but they're wrong and they're demonstrative of a systemic issue. So the fact that the regulator sits within the department is an issue, but I don't think you would be successful in challenging that in a judicial review court. The fact that the environment sits in the same department as agriculture and competing policies are being passed in favour of one objective, but harm the other is another systemic issue. Those are issues that a public inquiry would be capable of examining and making recommendations about.
Okay, can everybody hear that? Yeah. Thank you very much. I want to move on for a few minutes to one of the factors that I'd love to see a public inquiry also address. I mean, a public inquiry will obviously ask very searching questions and will also identify those who are culpable. But I also like a public inquiry to look at new models of governance. As we've heard in the conversation, there are people in the room who would say that, and I'd be one of them, I suppose, that the Lough Neagh really is a symptom of a broken system, a broken public system, but also a broken private system in terms of ownership and the fragmentation and the responsibilities that go with ownership, private ownership in particular. So I think there's an opportunity to really lift our eyes a little bit higher than some of the usual responses that we get to these issues. You know, that it's not just about new regulation, not even new laws, but maybe new ways of thinking about the governance of the system. We've also had a brief conversation about why this issue, well, there's a lot of interest. It's not widely recognized as a fundamental issue that belongs to all of us. It's, you know, as Louise has said, we're often warned by James not to describe ourselves as environmentalists. And what he's saying there, I think, is that the environment, Lough Neagh, is a symptom of a much larger set of questions that go to the heart of the global ecological crisis as well as the local manifestations like Lough Neagh. And these questions are about the nature of the economy, the way in which the state interacts with the economy, and the limitations, as we said, around formal ownership. And what's interesting about Lough Neagh, of course, is that it's part of our mythical legacy on the island. The Dudanan are reputed to live below the loch. These were, in the Irish mythology, a highly evolved, enchanted people who delight in their unity of mind and soul with the elements and with nature. James Moriarty, a philosopher and poet, very idiosyncratic figure in Irish writing and poetry, used the mythology. He summoned up the image of the Judaism to talk about a deep rupture in our ways of living with nature and the schism, if you like, between the human and nature and the way in which we relate and respect, belong to, and identify with nature. So some of the issues that have been prompted, some of the conversations that have been prompted by the impending death of the Lough, go to the heart of some of the myths and stories and ways of identifying with the island. And these are interesting ways to get into a very powerful story about the significance of the. I'm going to say a little bit about the power of the narrative to mobilize and maybe to lift the story out beyond the normal constituencies of environmental activism. Even McCann has commented that you can't tell the cultural history or the mythological story of the island without factoring in Lough Neagh. I'm going to skip that because I prepared a longer presentation. When I gave the presentation the title, What Lies Beneath, I wanted to invite you to look below the more obvious problems. There's obviously a problem of pollution, interaction with climate change, and problems of regulation. Very deep fragmentation. When we talk about the fragmentation, about the competing interests, we often implicitly, or we assume in the language up there that that's a kind of an accident. You know, that we've stumbled on this problem and we're going to do something about it by getting individual actors to be much more responsible. I would suggest to you that when it comes to our dominant economic narrative, when it comes to private property, when it comes to organising the relationships with our ecology, that fragmentation is part of the design system. It's built into the system. And unless we come up with forms of governance, reimagining the governance system that actually tackles that analyses, calls out that fragmentation, calls out the embedded competition for resources, the short-termism that goes with those individualised property interests around the Lough, we'll never get to the bottom of it. We'll come up with short-term legal responses, but we'll be back where we started if we don't tackle the underlying design failures in both the public and the private system. So this is a way to talk about this. It's Otto Scharmer's work. He talks about going beyond the economic to an eco-based way of thinking about deep systemic problems in our societies, so that we begin to think about patterns of behaviour, what trends over time have led or brought us to this moment, what are the structural or systems that we need to transform, and even what are the mental models. We need to move from a departure point which identifies individual proprietorial responsibilities to a more relational model of governance, a relational model of understanding our belonging, our responsibility, our ethics with nature and other people, of course. He has a number of good schemas that help us to think through the limits of the state-centric, the market-based ways of thinking about these issues. And he says that we are really going into a period where we are now moving towards an ecosystem awareness. You know, that's evident in environmentalism, in some cultural expressions. But it has to more and more be reflected in our forms of law, governance, and ways of thinking about guardianship and ownership as well. And one of the suppose the most obvious examples of that is the very ancient idea of the commons, where the relationship between people, the relationship between the resource, is fundamental. It's your departure point for your system of governance and the way you think about the peer-to-peer relationships between the different interest groups around the loch. And when we think about the commons, we're also thinking about commoning as a practice. The commons is not the resource. The commons refers to a deeply relational, political, cultural, and governance system where the body of water or the land is an active part of that series of relationships that demands respect, and the model is judged by the integrity of those relationships, measured by the regenerative capacity of the system itself. Another way to think about the narrative, is to think about the way in which the Lough story goes right back to the plantation, which really was our experience on the island of enclosure and privatisation, and this the deep fragmentation in our philosophical systems, as well as our legal and governance and economic systems, goes back to that period, so that we can think about our reflection on the Lough and our approach to the Lough as an undoing of some of those deeply damaging ideas that have come from that European set of practices. And we've clues about where that process might go, with the ways in which the civil rights movement tackled the issue, challenged some of the claims to proprietorial rights. This led indirectly to the formation of the cooperative model. What I'm suggesting is that in looking at the commons as a way of shared ownership and shared guardianship, we're simply extending that very beautiful intuition by the fishers and the eel cultivators that the cooperative model could be extended to all of the stakeholders as part of the overall solution and future governance of the system, and as an iconic presence in our landscape. There'd be no better example of a deeply relational alternative to relating to one another and relating to a precious resource that provides not only physical sustenance but deep cultural sustenance as well. So I'm going to end there, because I think in the course of the conversation we'll be able to say a little bit more, tease out what we mean by the commons. The important thing about the commons is that it's both an ancient way of respecting, collaborating, relating to resources, but over 1 billion people in the world today currently live in commons-based settings. So it's also a very contemporary, resurgent way of looking at the way we can take responsibility again as communities for our resources. Thanks.
So I'm the membership coordinator at the PILS project, and PILS stands for Public Interest Litigation Support. And so we really exist to support our members to bring cases in the public interest that will advance human rights and equality within Northern Ireland. And I guess to speak to our interest in caring for the law, I'll speak to kind of my personal interest and then also the organizational interest. But mine really comes out of a love of Belfast drinking water. And I didn't realize I had a connection to the Lough until I learned about the algae blooms. And that's when I found out that 40% of Northern Ireland's water comes from the Lough, and that the water that we drink comes from the Lough. And anytime we're outside of Belfast, we're always so excited to come back and drink the water. It's like the first thing we do when we get through the door. And so I think that really helped me to deepen my connection to the Lough, and I think also Lough played in sustaining their life until they had to think about what would happen if it wasn't there. And then from an organizational perspective, one of our priorities over the last year has been to bring more cases that are on the issue of climate justice, which we kind of view as an intersection of environmental law and human rights. And so we are trying to bring more cases. We have experience in these kinds of cases. Most recently, we've supported Friends of the Earth in a clean air challenge. And so that was a challenge against the Department for Infrastructure's failure to test the emissions in diesel cars. And that was when I heard, well, it's still going on, but it's been a continuing breach for 17 years. And we've also supported no gas caverns in a challenge to marine licenses that were granted in development projects in Lough Neagh. And so I guess what we really want to do is use the legal tools and resources at our disposal to connect community organizations with legal processes that can help advance arguments, and in this case, help to resolve the various contributing factors to legislation in the law. And so I think that there's three main ways that PILS might be able to support the kind of work that environmental organized groups are doing. So the first is that we can help organizations obtain legal advice and representation. So we can pair organizations with pro bono lawyers who can provide advice, provide a legal opinion on the merits of a particular claim that they might be thinking about, and then if the process or if the case proceeds into hearing, we can also provide representation for those members. So we're really trying to bridge the gaps that we see in enabling people to exercise their rights in the court. So the second gap that we see is when it comes to costs. So we also have funds to bring public interest litigation cases. So our model is unique in the sense that we maintain a litigation fund that our members can apply to draw from. So we can support court fees to obtain expert reports that you might want to use as evidence in claims, and then also an indemnity against any adverse costs order that's made if a case is not successful. And environmental cases here can benefit from cost capping under the House regulation, so it does make bringing these kinds of claims a little bit easier. And the third thing that we can do relates to knowledge sharing and capacity building. And we kind of do that in two main ways. So the first is through training for our members. So we really want to equip members to understand the legal processes that they choose to engage in or legal processes that they might find themselves implicated in. And so one example is we had a request from a member who wanted assistance with a freedom of information request, and sort of determined that would be something that would actually be helpful to a number of our members. So early in the year, we had training on how to make a freedom of information request. And then another issue that a lot of environmental campaigners have encountered is threats and intimidation. That can take a number of different forms, but one of those is threatening defamation cases. And so in January, we are putting on training so that members can understand what constitutes defamation, what are the defenses to defamation, and essentially understand what that process looks like if they find themselves implicated in it. And then the second way that we can support our members with building capacity and sharing knowledge is in resources that we try to create. So the first is Public Interest Litigation Toolkit. And so that is actually launching at the end of the month, and we're very excited about that. And it gives an overview of various legal processes in accessible language. So I'm just going to highlight two of them. But the first is judicial review, which has already been referred to. And so the guide sets out essentially all of the steps in the process, as well as the limitations of the process, because it is really important to understand what is most effective for the kind of challenge that you want to bring. And if there are questions about judicial review, I'm sure we'd be happy to answer them afterward. And then the second process that the toolkit talks about that might be helpful in these kinds of cases are third-party interventions. They haven't been used a great deal in this jurisdiction, but third-party interventions are a way for groups who might have particular expertise on the subject matter to become involved in a case without carrying the whole case themselves. So it provides an opportunity to use evidence that you think the court should look at that might not be produced by anyone else who's a part of that litigation. And so all of this support is available for members. If you're interested in becoming a PILS member, you can speak to me, or you can speak to Maria, our director, who's here too, or you can speak to other of our members who are in the room. So Louise from Lough Neagh is a member, and then we have a Bonnie from that too. So yeah, we'd love to be a part of the solution to.
Thanks for the invite. So I want to give a bit of background on Legal Justice Ireland, where I'm coming from, with how I conceived it, and some of the background which led me to conceive the law in the way in which I've done with this entity. So Legal Justice Ireland was formed as a community interest company, and it was inspired by my time working for the International Trade Union Confederation in Brussels. Now, it may seem counterintuitive, but for me, trade unions have the capacity to shift the dial in relation to the systemic problems we have in society, and that comes from my view as a socialist lawyer. So I'm a socialist first and a lawyer second. And whenever I worked for the International Trade Union Confederation, we had over 200 million members worldwide, and as Peter alluded to, we have to look at this as a global issue of capitalist extractivism and treating the environment as an externality, which is a product of a myth of capitalism as a way of governing our lives. So whenever I come to analyse this issue, as with many issues, I start from the point of being a socialist lawyer and not elevating the law to be the answer, because for me, the answer lies with people who are workers, people who are within communities, people such as Louise. And the way in which we can expedite this is to think of the law as the way in which we choose to accept the status quo. And throughout the evolution of history, there's no inevitability for us ever accepting the status quo, and we've got the capacity and the agency to change. And the way in which trade unions have changed the world, I think, is an answer to the way in which we view the law, particularly in this jurisdiction. Because from a socialist perspective and from my own perspective, this jurisdiction doesn't have legitimacy. The way in which we conceive the law and we conceive constitutional structures that govern our lives, we need to think anew along the lines of Peter's alluded to again. So with that in mind, I want to talk about a global way of thinking and a local way of thinking, so that not useful. And I think whenever you think of transnational cooperation, the International Treaty Confederation has that global agency, but similarly the organisation Lough Neagh is another organisation working internationally with farm labourers, with those that are indigenous to the land in different places. And I think that whenever you get a grasp of the way that they think about the land and the way that they organise together, we're lucky that we recently set up the Land Workers Alliance NI, which is part of Lough Neagh Campesina, and again is working in the background and sort of below the surface to help generate a different way of thinking and engaging on these issues. And I think that again, from the trade union perspective, there's some good examples from other parts of the world which could apply in this particular situation. So in New Zealand, or sorry, I won't come on to New Zealand, but in Australia in the 1970s, there was a movement called the Green Bans movement, whereby trade unionists refused to build construction projects on environmentally protected land or that would be environmentally damaging. And that was because workers working together with local communities realised that the law was insufficient and capable of ensuring the protection of their local environment. And they did succeed for a period of time, partly because of union density at that stage in history, to change the way that people related to urban planning and urban environment. But the principle holds true as we face this injustice in our local jurisdiction. And we have different ways and different tools to think about it. One is the rights of nature, which Peter alluded to as well, whereby we would give Lough Neagh legal ownership to exist and thrive in its own rights. Now, there is an argument as to whether it's community ownership or public ownership under the governance of this failed devolution experiment. So we have to think about new constitutional models and the way in which the law would operate with more legitimacy. And we can again look at international experience, because we've got examples in Russia where a new society has been built on the basis of ecological justice. It's been based on feminist liberation and democratic confederalism. And democratic confederalism would be akin to the community-based way of thinking and engaging in local governance. And we give that way of thinking and relating to the land and the power evolved further, but in a way which is reimagined along the lines of care and feminist theory and the way in which we need to think about justice in a different way. And that can extend further beyond the way in which we look at our current governance structures on this island. And we can conceive Lough Neagh as a bioregion which should be administered not by four incompetent local authorities, which are sort of fragments of the failed system, but a way of thinking of the law and of life in a different way. And again, even in the last few weeks, last few days, we've seen the power of international solidarity, where citizens in Gaza who are restricted from accessing their water have been supported by workers who refuse to transport weapons to Israel. And I think we have to link our struggles to the global capitalist system and the way that it operates. If you look at the way in which in the south there's a campaign, Save Our Forests, and that campaign is focused on a second wave of colonisation, because a hedge fund has sought to buy Irish forestry through Quailshire, and what they're seeking to do is to use that for the interests of capital against the interests of nature and for people. So an area the size of Carlow is going to be, or is reported to be, governed on behalf of our interests by a sort of hedge fund based in London. So I think whenever you bring these issues back to how we live in this jurisdiction and the way that we engage with the law and with public authorities. We have to do what people are doing with Lough or other local organisations, but look at those connections with workers. Why could there not be a clean ban imposed by workers who live and work and extract from the Lough? Now, that ties into the notion of a just transition, but if we give the capacity and the encouragement for solidarity for those workers who may say, no, we're not going to continue to extract, we can then start a different way of thinking that gets us closer to how Peter's re-envisaging systems thinking, and we can then treat Lough Neagh as a bioregion that can be allowed to rejuvenate, reflourish, and have a sense of renewal for that area, but also for itself.
Thanks very much. Thank you, panel. Very interesting and quite challenging in some respects as well. Thought-provoking, most definitely. I wanted to come in earlier on. I'm a co-witness in the infected blood inquiry, having been a victim. And I can empathise with the observations that were made in relation to public inquiries. We're waiting for one of the big issues, which is a concern, of course, for this forum, would be that in our case we're waiting for Sir Graham Langstaff to come forward in March with his public pronouncements. The process started back in 2018. He was appointed in 2017 before he left judiciary retirement. The issue is it takes a long time with the public inquiry. That's a downside. Then you've got to enact, recognise and enact the benefits that are coming out of that and the proposals and recommendations. The plus side is that you can get down into the minutiae and you hear from the organisations that hold key answers to the questions that need to be answered, and that you can hold them to accountability. So I agree fully with that process. I'm also familiar, can I say, from my position with my colleague in Marine Conservation in Northern Ireland, and have chaired a number of meetings in Ireland where I reside, concerning the caverns issue, and met with and set up meetings with the department. So I'm very familiar with that, and the work that you're doing is very good, and I appreciate that in that context. I'm a straight thinker. I'm not a complicated individual. I've learned not to be. The years of experience that I've gained both in industry and also in other fields has led me to a simple conclusion. I wrote to the department several weeks ago, and as just an ordinary Joe, not from Marine Conservation, as an ordinary Joe, and I got a response. My response was from the Marine Department, and it indicated that the operational task team and the river basin planning team were both supposedly responsible. The question I asked, by the way, was what are your solutions and what are the issues and how are you fixing them? Well, I would like to ask the panel, is it possible, there's obviously legal implications, but is it possible to establish some form of structure that can seek answers directly, because they have given me a very clear position in relation to what they're proposing and what they are doing. and I don't see any evaluation in any of this information. And that highlights the fact, as the panel has said, and yourself as well, that there are issues concerning the impacts of what's happening and how we need to change them. So I think we need to have some form of strategic leadership to identify what they're telling us is their Bible and prove to us in their own words that it hasn't worked, and then resolve that issue. And that means change. Legally, that's going to be extremely helpful.
Thanks for all that. I think that's the very essence of the issue. That's what my thoughts are on this. There's a system here that's used like method, and there's no clear line of responsibility or accountability. So there's a systemic issue here, so it needs to be looked at a political level, and it needs to be changed in terms of a legal mechanism. The public inquiry system is not perfect. Reforms will need to be made to that system in terms of a legal mechanism. Here's to declare that that's the best route to explore those issues and to identify the problems and make recommendations for change. In Hillsborough, the report was published in that inquiry 5.5 years ago. None of them recommendations have been implemented or adopted by government. But I know there are other lawyers in this arena saying that there should be a mechanism within the inquiry process, where the decision makers are brought back before the chair.
Just to add to Nigel's comment there, Nigel's got this information from them. It's their own description of what they're doing. What needs to happen is to force them to explain what they're doing, and then after that explain why it's not working. And ask them for a review of that.
Yeah, well, that sort of comes back to another point that I've alluded to. Claire and I are looking at some individual legal actions, and one of the legal actions then is a challenge against DERA and the Environmental Agency in relation to their general failure to take adequate steps to prevent the ecological and environmental damage to Lough Neagh. So that's quite a broad challenge.
I'll maybe stand up there just before I come to the question for the panel. I'm Dean Blackwood, I'm from the River Falcon Anglers, and just the points that were being raised there earlier. One of the angles that you could take is through the environmental liability regulations here. It's the only piece of legislation I know where there's like an inbuilt third-party right of intervention. It's Regulation 22. We've used it successfully quite recently, where in fact what it allows you, if you can show that you have an interest in the loch, you can then raise the concerns about either environmental harm or impending environmental harm, and there's a legal obligation on DERA to first of all investigate it and tell you what the issues are and whether or not they're going to take it forward. We did it on the Falcon very recently because of the serial pollution that was being caused by the A6. And what that led to was DERA intervening, negotiating with DFI, who had given the contract. It got the pollution stopped, but it also got a prosecution. So what we then got was it was a £10,000 fine, which was nothing. But that has allowed us on the back of that now to go with a civil case. So we've initiated a civil case for compensation. So I would recommend the look at the environmental liability regulations for Northern Ireland here. In terms of my question for the panel, about the public inquiry, we've also quite a bad experience in public inquiry. The public inquiry into illegal waste disposal in Northern Ireland called for unanimously in the Assembly 2014, and then the executive passed that motion, and the executive then set about ensuring that it didn't happen essentially. And in fact, one of the ministers in the executive confided in us afterwards that he believed that the biggest opposition to the public inquiry came from the officials. Now, so how do you get around that point? But the other, and I suppose the other part of the question is, who can initiate a public inquiry in the absence of the Assembly? Do you go to the Secretary of State?
I think, you've just highlighted the situation where we're hitting our heads against the wall with Lough Neagh actually, because despite kind of the forthcoming of all of the officials in public telling the patient's families that they care so deeply about what's happened, they're so sorry, this should never have happened, and you're entitled to all the answers in a prompt and effective way, but yet then they'll send correspondence with completely the opposite coming forward, and it is a battle. How we did that, I think I was kind of touching on earlier, is you really can't underestimate when groups come together like the way you have, forming a collective voice, which then holds them to account. And the strategy that I have found most effective in serious campaigns like that is joining together the law with the media and with the academic course, and I think every week almost holding them to account with social media, in the media, any way that you can, using your contacts. That, I believe, is the only way to shame. Often, judicial review letters are useful, but that judicial review letter finding its way into the Irish News is more useful, and as far and wide as it can go. So, how to get them, how to deal with the officials is by writing to them repeatedly, and like the value of that work that you just told us about, it's getting the name of whoever's representing you and getting it off to the media, getting it out there is really, in my experience, the best way forward. Then, I suppose the Lough Neagh situation that it's not really in Lough Neagh anymore because we're always here. I feel like, it's more regular in Northern Ireland when you've no executive, and then when they're in post, well, they seem to be causing us harm as well. So, the situation is that any judicial review challenge would be directed to the permanent secretary for DAERA. I believe that's
Godfrey.
What we did with Lough Neagh was we had to write to Richard Fingelly, and he was the permanent secretary for health. The power is there. I had a look at this to refresh my memory before it came out, but the Northern Ireland Act passes functions on a Northern Ireland department in the absence of devolved ministers. Now, the department's Northern Ireland order states that the functions of the department may be exercised by A, the minister, or B, a senior officer of that department. And obviously, the Executive Functions Act then came in 2022, which kind of has to be read together with that. Don't I hate talking about all this convoluted stuff, but again, it's not that there's no absence of the prerogative power. They still have a duty to protect us, even though they fail to govern. The permanent secretary is the one that you write to, but the head of the civil service has a duty in the absence of devolution. So hopefully that's helpful.
If I can just respond to that man's point. Iron A8 dual carriageway. The club I'm a member of, I was in the committee of the New England Club. We were watching the tributaries and we saw them fill up with silt on the reds, and that was August, September. We took photographs, got to the Stormont and got the roads minister, and the contractor got hammered and told to meet us every 2 weeks until we were satisfied, and that worked. And it's just an example that departments don't learn. Because they went and did the same thing for the A6, am I right?
A6,
we're run off, it's spoiled, got into the river.
Yeah.
So they don't learn.
They do that. They
I raised an issue with through my MP to the Permanent Secretary for Northern Ireland. All I did was refer back to Sarah.
So I was very disappointed from your comments, I have to say. But before I extend my question, I want to say I'm an engineer. I'm a professor for cybersecurity. And in engineering, I'm a passionate IC designer. So in microchip. In the microchip, you can't have a mistake. If you make a mistake, the chip doesn't work. And millions, and tens of millions, even half go into debt. So, if you make a mistake, you try to find who made this mistake, why this mistake can happen. A mistake can happen due to standards. Due to standards is equivalent to policies. We talked about behavior policies, of course, by other people. Mistakes can happen to another reason of the corporations. Some executives making wrong decisions as well, not because of an engineer. But if a mistake happens, it has to be executed, the reason has to be found, and this has to be fixed. And the person or the group's individual responsible has to be fired or made liable for this. Whether it is the executive who's going to be fired, or whether the standardization body has to be sued, somebody has to pay for it. Now we have a problem, same problem. Why politicians have been made liable for it? Why the farmers can be made liable for it? Why is telling me that nobody's liable for it?
I didn't say that nobody was
somebody has to pay for it. I'm only saying that when I heard the public inquiry, I have never seen that any public inquiry ever resolved. And I can't see that ever be resolved. I'm not criticizing you in general. You know, why? Because as a public, I would like to see, is there any way that at least at a smaller scale, individuals can be made liable for it?
Because you're talking about a civil action.
Yeah, this is what I think. In a form of, because I know it works in industry.
Yeah, but I haven't talked about
Yeah.
civil action.
Okay.
Yet I haven't touched upon it.
I think this is something that needs to be explored because from my personal experience, obviously the example of a policy I explained, the standardization or the executive decision, which is not the engineer's fault that then the chip doesn't work. But at this level, somebody has to make it reliable. And here, I see the same. If politicians make decision or organization within the system make decision, somehow somebody has to be reliable.
I understand what you're saying. The way it works for lawyers is that clients contact us with a particular issue or problem, and they give us instructions to take a particular piece of litigation or whatever. When the client approach their right at that particular issue, of course, we would explore it.
We as a public are the clients. Let's see.
Can I maybe ask a question that might sort of lead on from that? Because Terry, you had touched upon the potential for civil claims. So maybe if you want to speak to that, because we had a bit of a conversation with Hillary from Pill, but we had thought at one point about potential for civil claims because obviously so many people have become sick, so many people have lost animals, so many people have lost in their businesses. But it's that real difficult point because who owns the law? Who is actually responsible? And it's just a whole lot of finger pointing going on from that. So I don't know if you've had a chance to explore it, if you've had anybody come to you.
I haven't spoken about it tonight, but there have been swimmers came to our office. There are people whose businesses depended on the lock, and all that's been affected and damaged really by the environmental and the pollution that's been caused to it. So first we need to establish that there's been a breach of a particular legal duty, and that would be informed by expert opinion, by somebody qualified as an ecologist, an environmentalist, etc. The second step then was to show that caused a particular sickness or health outcome for that person, and then the step after that then is to assess the extent of that damage. So that is possible, and that is something that we're looking at.
I'd like to support the man at the front who basically talked about accountability. I love this discussion because we're approaching it on many levels. We're looking at the community, we're looking at our belief systems have to change, the fundamental things, we're talking about stopping it. But what can we do quickly? And the thing is, there's an awful lot of easy targets out there. We're trying to fix the whole thing, and certain people will need to work in media, certain people will need to work in different areas. But there's an awful lot of easy targets, and what I find is people don't bring them forward. And solicitors can't act unless a client comes in and says, I want to bring this. A lot of people can get legal aid. A lot of people, is our house cost protection. There's all sorts of means whereby it's affordable. So the thing is, it is not just the big case like DARE versus NIA. It's the individual septic tank that's leaking. And it's like this gentleman says, there are thousands of things that individually have added up to this problem, probably hundreds of thousands over very many years. And we will get overwhelmed if we think if we need to fix this in a year. It's going to take many years to reverse this as well, bringing the health of the lot back. But I sort of see this here as like combined arms in warfare. You need to have many things working together, or like an orchestra, they all need to work together. But if you've got easy targets and you've got good artillery, let's start hitting the easy targets and encourage people. Like your legal firms, encourage people to bring it in, and you'll find ways to get it funded. I'm sure. There's a lot of easy targets.
I can
Yeah,
so we're involved in the south with an organisation, Prayer Champions, and their issues around the handling of the COVID pandemic with the Irish government. So those families have brought individual civil claims as a way to put pressure on the government, and in parallel with that there's been a campaign and there's been legal action for a public inquiry as well. So I agree all of them granular issues, and I thought that was a very clever case that I brought there as well. So I agree individual actions and also the bigger picture should be looked at as well.
If I could say this one thing, is that the system very often will support itself. Now the problem is you have to break that. And I've taken many judicial reviews as a personal litigant, and what I find is if you challenge DARE, you challenge the DFI, and you challenge the council all at once, they start to fracture and they separate and they don't support each other anymore. So the thing is getting a lot of missiles firing on the battlefield, so people are ducking for cover. There's so many things individually, and if we tolerate the small things, we can't expect the big things. The lock is the final symptom of the problem. The problem is all the individual acts of polluting the local stream. We've turned a blind eye to everything, cutting trees down so it doesn't absorb rainfall, letting sediment go. It's thousands of tens of thousands. So it's not just trying to fix the lock on its own. That's impossible without going back and dealing with all the minutiae.
Well, I'm going to agree with the gentleman who's just spoken. I'm Alice, and myself and my daughter are open water swimmers. She swims as a mermaid, so we're very interested in the lock. So what we've been doing is we started a campaign to get people to read the labels on their products, and a lot of them are avoid release into the environment, dangerous to aquatic life with long-lasting effects. And I am absolutely determined to get people to read those labels, stop using those products, because if we don't put the filth into the water, it doesn't need to be cleaned. So I've got nearly 4,000 hits on a YouTube video, and one of them is just going around supermarkets, looking at the labels, going, you're putting that down your toilet, and it's coming out into the water. And people are interested in that. So as the gentleman's saying, it's not one person, one bathroom, it's all the supermarkets, it all adds up. And then the other thing is, if we're not using water flush toilets, if we can use eco toilets, earth toilets, compost toilets, get town planners involved and change. Now, some eco toilets cost £2,000. Some of them you can make yourself, some of them are free. So if we don't put it into the water, it's not going to pollute the loch. We need to change people. But so can I just ask, is there any town planners or anybody on board that was doing road beds and things? That's what I'm at.
I'm a town planner.
Oh, good man. I'll be talking to you afterwards if you can.
This is not so much a question, but I'm not even first in the queue.
Can I say, I think there's a problem with personal integrity. It's totally lacking from the bottom of government the whole way up. And it should start in our education systems. People should be told to stand up and tell the truth. And if they make a mistake, consider they say, sorry, I made a mistake better. And if that would follow right up through the government organisations, we would get far more integrity coming right through. When we ask for a freedom of information question or into the council, you get deliberate obstruction. Instead of somebody saying, this is the case, this is what integrity which has come up through the system. And it's not only the people that are organising, it's the individuals outside it. And I can say in the law, sometimes I feel the law goes one way or the other. The law defends whatever the person pays the money. Basically. It's an adversarial situation. One will fight one way, one fight the other way. Many people here are guilty to get off. But we need people to stand up and say it's wrong. Individuals stand up. You will be hammered, no question about it.
There are two national designations covering Lough Neagh, and coming back to this point about fragmentation, which the government loves to divide and conquer. Can we please consider that we make it our lochs, because the Ramsar designation and the SAC and the SPA, that's Special Protection Area, covers 41,000 hectares of the lake and the wetlands around it, and includes Lough Neagh. And through an age 6 judicial review, my wife and I have learned a lot about how they cover things up. And Suanna Queens has produced a podcast where my wife, the Mackenzie friend, Doris Noy, speaks for more than an hour about these matters. So there's a voice of a woman. My name is Chris Murphy.
Just to, like, how can we stop the pollution? Like, is there a way for the injunction? Like you mentioned, injunction, just to say, stop sand dredging now. Is there a way to do that? Like, we know what the problems are, and meanwhile it continues. Is there a shortcut way, like an emergency thing? I don't know, to say, stop the sand dredging?
There was a judicial review put on that in 2022, and it is published online. I think Friends of the Earth has supported that judicial review, but it wasn't successful, unfortunately.
It was successful.
No,
it was successful, but well, it was successful. But then the sand dredgers got retrospective planning permission.
Yeah.
I guess judicial review is what the courts refer to as the remedy of last resort. The court really does not want to become involved in taking decisions that elected officials have been entrusted by the public to take, even in a situation where deep pollution has collapsed. So there are real limitations to what judicial review can achieve, but like the gentleman said about having an artillery of different weapons that you deploy at different times, it can certainly affect the agenda in the right direction. And if there is a particular failure that we can cling on to and provide expert evidence before the court, it will apply pressure, and often the judge can find in favour of the campaign. But the reason we suggest the judicial review, the public inquiry mechanism, is because it can have a more holistic look at all of the different parties who have failed, and unlike the very narrow outcomes the judicial review committee, say it's unlawful and refer it back, or force a department to do something. They do that very rarely. The inquiry can achieve a bit more. Just finally, on public inquiry, I heard a totally agree. You know, it does take a long time, but one of the things that families affected and engaged in a statutory inquiry can ask the chair for, and often this has happened, and in Macklemore we're doing that, is they can make interim recommendations.
Yes, they can, and in the case of public inquiry, as a case in point on affected blood, the judge made one in the previous year, and the government acted on it. That was for victims infected. But for victims' families who were affected, we're still waiting for it. And we had the Chancellor and the Prime Minister in London at the inquiry, and the Chancellor gave more information, but insufficient, and the Prime Minister basically shut down both the barrister and the judge. They came in like two shotguns after each other, and he just shut them down. So the other issue, of course, which is this third matter, you get your public inquiry, it takes a lot of time to get the results, then it takes the government time to conjugate.
Yeah. I agree. It's imperfect,
Yes,
certainly.
Yeah, I think it's always worth just throwing out the, I suppose, what I believe is a fact that we, in these conversations, there's a kind of an assumption that we're all working to a shared purpose. You know, that everybody's doing their best to go to the system work better and the incentives were aligned. But you know, we heard that the agency was placed within DARE. That was a deliberate, which came on the back of a campaign for an independent EPA. And the campaign and the agency were neutered from day one. Subsumed within the agricultural interest, the agricultural lobby. Why? Because overarching all of this, that we have a party at the top of government, one of the dominant parties, which has a deeply ambivalent relationship to all of this in terms of respect for the environment, protection, as opposed to championing both corrupt and non-corrupt economic practices. And unless we're thinking and speaking honestly in those terms, then we're wasting each other's time.